My favorite Pokemon is probably Flabébé.
Nice. It's fun to say as well.
Yeah, I think Flabébe's name is hilarious. And also, like many Pokemon, she's so cute.
I'd like to kind of start right back at the beginning where possible. And I was wondering what were some of kind of like your very, very early memories of games and gaming and getting into it in the first place?
Well, I originally got into gaming. Some of my friends and kind of older cousins had some very, very early, what we now know as home console units in their house. So I'm talking like Atari level, or I'd see people have the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System. And I thought, this is awesome. I want that. Like, I played a lot of board games, but I always had to convince my parents to play with me. I was not an only child, but my next oldest sibling is 5 years younger than me. So video games to me were like board games that I didn't have to beg somebody else to play. I could just play them. So that was great. But my parents, I mean, as most parents were at this time, my parents were not into gaming or that kind of stuff at all. So they had no idea what I was talking about. So bless my father. Someone he worked with was getting rid of a COM64. And He was like, oh, that's video games, right? I think that's what my kid's asking for. So my father actually brought home like a secondhand Commodore 64, and this was while all my friends had the Nintendo. So some of my earliest gaming memories are like the old text-based adventure games like Zork and stuff like that on a COM64. And then I eventually begged my parents to get me a Nintendo, so while all my friends upgraded to Super Nintendo, I finally got a Nintendo, which then made me the kid that could garage sale all the Nintendo games. So I ended up with a collection of something like 175 Nintendo games that I had gotten at garage sales. So I played a lot of the Nintendo Entertainment System back in the day. And then after that, my parents said, this is too much. No more video games for you, young lady. And at that point, I ported over to PC games, where I played a lot of Monkey Island and King's Quest and Return to Zork and Doom. And then I kind of firmly settled in the PC gamer space until I was old enough to buy myself new consoles, which was closer to like the PS2 era. So yeah, my gaming history goes back quite a while, and I feel like I have a little bit more knowledge of the retro systems than a lot of other folks my age as a result.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. It's like, I love that. It's like the logic of like a parent and a child. It's like, oh yeah, playing games on a computer. It's totally different. It's much better for kids to be on computers.
Well, you need a computer for work, right? And I'm putting "for work" in quotations there. For schoolwork, you need a computer for schoolwork, and also games. But like, parents don't need to know that.
Am I right in saying you were like got into like kind of modding and jailbreaking your own computer and stuff quite early because of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So I remember thinking it was something like, oh man, I'm looking at this box for Doom, and it needs 4 MB of RAM. I don't know what any of that means. But my father, who's an auto mechanic, is real good at fixing stuff from like a hardware perspective. So he was down to help me figure out how to get 4 MB of RAM. And the fact that we only needed 4 megabytes to run that game tells you how long ago this was. But yeah, I learned pretty early.
It's funny, my dad's a mechanic as well, and you never need to do anything. It's great. anything technical, Dad.
Yeah, dads are great. My parents, I found out they were working off a PC. They don't live near me. I found out they were working off a PC that was like 10 plus years old. So I put together a PC for them and shipped it to them. But in shipping it, I removed the graphics card because, GPUs in shipping, they're heavy, and it can break the motherboard. And so anyway, I removed the graphics card, and I called my dad and said, okay, did the PC arrive? I made an instructional video for you on how to put the GPU back in. And he was like, yeah, I already did it. Wait, you what, Dad? That's a very expensive thing to mess up. And he was like, nah, I already did it. It works fine. The computer's great. And I was like,
I just shoved it in there. It was fine.
Okay. I mean, that's basically, he just shoved it in there, basically. But again, shout out auto mechanics for just being able to figure stuff out. Way to go, Dad.
Yeah, I mean, you've done better than me, though, in that it sounds like you're quite technically minded yourself, whereas I've just completely outsourced everything like that to my dad. Like, if I was trying to put something into a PC, I'd probably call him rather than the other way around.
Oh, well, you know what? If you ever want to build a PC, let me know. That's kind of my area of expertise now.
Awesome. I will take you up on that. I was wondering, are there any kind of games from that like early era for you that really kind of like stuck with you, or that you wish would kind of make a comeback, or that more people have played them, or anything like that?
Oh man, so many. So many. And a lot of them are making a comeback. We're like in the golden age of video game nostalgia right now. But because I spent so long with the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, I mean, games like, of course, Super Mario Brothers and The Legend of Zelda are still going very strong, but like Paperboy, Bubble Bobble, Excite Bike, DuckTales had a remaster recently, Contra, Double Dragon, those are all great. And we have seen kind of the resurgence of the old PC games. Like we're in a big retro FPS resurgence right now. Monkey Island got redone. We've recently had a King's Quest. So yeah, it's a good time to kind of look back at that 90s era of gaming. And yeah, we're still living in it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it does make me feel old though every time it's like, here's the new retro mini console, and it's like, well, I had the original of this.
Now, do you still have the working originals?
No, I have like none of my early stuff anymore. I have two older brothers and a sister, so I wonder if because we had Sega Mega Drive, we had PS1, I wonder if they are gathering dust with one of my siblings somewhere, or if they've just been gone, like you say, to the garage sale at some point.
They may be, or honestly, they just stop working at some point. You know, we all kind of blew in the end of our gaming cartridges and jiggled them around enough that we probably did damage to the system and the hardware after a while. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and then some things like, what was it? I was trying to play, because I've still got my Game Boy Color, I was still trying to play Pokemon Silver, like relatively recently. I was like, I just want to, have like a bit of a retro time with that. And and I looked it up, and it's apparently a common thing that like the day-night cycle in the game doesn't work anymore, because it had like a little the chip that would monitor time would like fritz out and die after like 20 years or so. At some point it had just given up. Like, yeah, like it still plays, but it can't like tell you when is it nighttime or anything like that.
Okay, well, at least you can still play. I'm rediscovering Pokemon myself right now. I was just like a little bit old for, I never had a Game Boy, and then I was like a little bit old for the card game when that released. I was already playing Magic the Gathering. But my son now, I have a son, and he's very into Pokemon, so I'm getting to rediscover it through him, which is really cool.
Nice. What's his favorite Pokemon, or what's your favorite Pokemon?
Oh, man. My favorite Pokemon is probably Flabébé.
Nice. It's fun to say as well.
Yeah, I think Flabebe's name is hilarious. And also, like many Pokemon, she's so cute. Very cute, but also very powerful. But yeah, the Pokemon thing is very strong in my house right now.
Nice. Yeah, it never dies. Like, it just seems to every like new generation that comes through are still mad for it, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of zooming out slightly, in kind of your whole life, what games do you think you've put the most kind of sheer hours into?
Oof, there are so many over the years. Diablo and The Sims, and Heroes of Might. Well, Diablo and The Sims were really popular in my college years, which I had a lot of time for gaming then.
Yeah. So
I definitely sank a lot of hours into those games. Heroes of Might and Magic and Rampage are probably the games I sunk the most hours into as a kid. Rampage on the original NES, because that was back in the time where there were no game saves. So if you were going to beat a game, you had to just do it in like one big chunk. And so there were so many times that I got 4 or 5 hours into Rampage, and then my mom would make me turn off the console and I'd have to start all over. So by the time I finally beat that game, I probably had hundreds of hours into it. And I think I did it during a sleepover with a friend. And Heroes of Might and Magic was it was one of my first turn-based strategic games that I played, and I just fell in love. And to this day, that's a genre I really enjoy. And I'll sink a lot of hours into that as well.
Nice. And how did you come to be like covering games, talking about games for a living? I imagine there weren't many jobs like that.
No, there definitely, I didn't even know that was a job one could get. I just played a lot of video games as my hobby. But when I went to college, I studied theater. So my degree is in classical theater. And I had moved to Los Angeles in the hopes of becoming an actress, and being able to make a career in television and film and commercial work. And one day I kind of tripped and fell into an audition for, they said they were casting for a news reporter, but they were also kind of sideline casting, or subtly casting, news anchors for a channel that would cover a lot of different fandom topics. So video games, anime, tech reviews, comic books. And I didn't know that. No one knew that going into these auditions. So they were looking for news hosts first and foremost, but then on the sly, kind of looking for people that could cover other stuff. So I did my audition, I did my read, and it went fine. But then they started asking me questions that I thought, this is really bizarre for a news audition. They'd ask me if I played video games, what video games I liked, if I read any books or liked any specific shows, if I read any comic books. And I remember leaving that audition thinking, I don't know what job that was really for, but I think I nailed it. And they called me in for a screen test the next day, and that led into a 3-year full-time job on a YouTube channel that became very popular, where I was hired to be a full-time on-camera presenter, and not just presenting, but we would write our own scripts for that as well, research and write our own scripts. So I kind of got thrown into games journalism without really having a journalism degree or any background in it. I was just an enthusiast that was put on camera. So I did have the on-camera background, and I had to learn the rest of it. But up until that point, I hadn't even thought about being able to merge my hobby and what I had trained in for my career into one thing. But ever since I realized that was a possibility, I was on board. Everyone's dream, I think, is to have a job doing what they love. And, like any job, there are parts of the job that you do not love. But really, I get to have conversations like I'm having with you right now about PC building and smartphones and gadgets we can take apart and put back together, and video games and tabletop games and comic book characters and fandom. And it's really quite incredible.
Yeah, definitely. What have you kind of seen the kind of I don't want to necessarily use the word discourse, but like the way that the conversation around games has changed over the years? I feel like when you first started, was it maybe like a lot more weight was still being put on like games magazines and stuff like that and things like that, and it's become more and more video led? Or do you think it's always been a bit of both, really, and stuff like that?
It's definitely an interesting conversation. I do think that, you can go all the way back to the days of Nintendo Power, but at the time that I got into it, written editorial reviews were still where it was at. And so doing like video reviews is kind of what I started in, which was strange because it was still the editorial review, just in video format. And now we've seen the industry and the discourse really move to less of a review structure. Nowadays, people just want to see a game in action and then decide for themselves if it's something they think they'll like, which I like that format a lot better. In general, I'm not about yucking anyone else's yum, and if hundreds or thousands of people have put a lot of time and energy into creating something, I think it's very egotistical for one person to say, my opinion is objective fact, and this is good or bad or, whatever. So I think in general, the gaming industry has kind of moved away from those really hardline number score reviews. There are, of course, still written editorial places that do them. But even when we started doing video reviews, we would tend to go with more of a fluid review structure where it's like, would play again, would not play again, would buy, would rent, that kind of thing, as opposed to a number score. And nowadays, honestly, in my own content, I never give a review score. I can say, like, here are things I enjoy about it, here are things I'd like to see different about it, but you decide for yourself. Just because it's not my cup of tea doesn't mean it's not yours. So you have now seen it, and you're an adult. You can make a decision if you think it's something you would enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. And there will always be, like you say, it's subjective. It's like people have different tastes, and like some people love types of games that I don't, and vice versa. And that's just the world. It feels like people want it to be like, oh, this game tanked and it bombed, but you can still probably find people that loved it, and it's like.
Exactly. And that's why, whether it be in any form of art, whether it's movies or books, there are cult classics for a reason. Maybe they weren't super commercially successful, but they found their people later on. I think there's a shoe for every foot. There's people out there for every game, even if it's E.T.
Definitely.
Which, for those listening, is famously one of the worst games ever created, and actually the cartridges are in a landfill somewhere. But I'm sure there are people out there that like it.
And the fact that it has gone to landfills probably weirdly made it a collector's item, right? Like,
totally. I bet those cartridges are worth money now.
It's so weird. I heard I think Funko Pops. I think they've recently done a similar thing. I think where it's like they've just produced way too many Funko Pops, and it's like the end of Toy Story 3. They're being like melted down or something.
Oh no! Oh, poor Funko Pops. That would be the saddest to like watch one melt. Although I bet there's an audience for that too.
Oh, definitely. I've started. Now that I'm going to say this out loud, I'll see more of it on my algorithmic feeds. But I've started seeing like people doing like, what's the word? Like a hydraulic crush of like. I saw one of a PS2 the other day and it made me want to cry, but it was still very watchable.
Please forward that to me. As someone that loves tech, it's a very weird thing to watch tech destruction videos. But a lot of channels they'll do them in slow motion, and like for whatever reason, it's very satisfying to watch.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a tear down, but just like way more
intense.
Intense. Yeah. I was like, what's the word? Yeah, intense. I'll do it.